When the Siege of Candia, the capital of Crete, began, it lasted for about 21 years. In retaliation for Ottoman attempts, the Venetians raided the islands of Lemnos and Tenedos several times, but despite all this they could not lift the Turks from the Siege of Candia. In the reign of Sultan Mehmed IV, the city was finally conquered, and the island of Crete was incorporated into the Ottoman Empire. After Kara Mustafa was killed, his successor Sultan Zaid Pasha began praising every act of Ibrahim to win his favor. He assured Ibrahim that because he was the Caliph, every word and deed of his was in fact divinely inspired. Ibrahim now became more unrestrained than before, when the treasury amassed by Sultan Murad could no longer meet his needs for luxury. He began selling off all the great offices of the military posts, and only those candidates were appointed who could offer the highest sums. In addition to the old taxes, numerous new levies were imposed, some of which were ridiculous by name alone. Ibrahim was especially fond of amber perfumes. To satisfy this passion, he imposed a special amber tax. He was also very fond of sable furs, and for that, too, he introduced a special sable tax. He sent orders to all provincial governors and major institutions to supply a fixed number of sables and dispatch them. This demand was even made of judges and military officers. These new imposts created widespread resentment throughout the empire. When these revenues also proved insufficient for the expenses and luxuries of the harem, Ibrahim confiscated ancestral estates from some of the great men by various devices and sold them. The patience of the people had now run out, and they were fully ready for revolt. Through his waywardness, Sultan Ibrahim had alienated every class: the army, the community of scholars, and every stratum of the capital stood prepared for rebellion. Accordingly, a group resolved to depose Sultan Ibrahim. Among the leaders were the Janissary, Augusta, captains of the corps. The conspirators, backed by leading scholars, began their efforts. In this indictment against Ibrahim, they charged that the Sultan, by his tyranny, had destroyed the Ottoman system. Power lay in the hands of women of the harem. Major offices were not filled by those worthy of them, but by those who bribed their way in. And after all this, the Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa had been unjustly executed. Sultan Ibrahim's short reign, despite internal disorder, was not devoid of external significance. 2 historic campaigns took place, and in both the Ottoman Empire ultimately achieved victory. The first of these was against Russia, remembered as the Azov campaign. In 1637, the Russian Cossacks attacked and captured the city of Azov. This city, on the shores of the Sea of Azov, was of considerable commercial and military importance. Only 4 years before Ibrahim's accession, it had fallen into Cossack hands. To recover Azov from them, Ibrahim sent a naval squadron. The Russian Cossacks successfully resisted the Turks, and the Turks were eventually forced to withdraw. The following year, another army of 26,000 men was dispatched under Islam Pasha, and the Khan of Crimea, tributary to the Ottomans, marched with 100,000 Tatars against the Russians. This time, the Russian Cossacks could not withstand the powerful Ottoman army and were forced to abandon the city. Before departing, however, they set Azov on fire. The Turks rebuilt the city very solidly and stationed another detachment there. Yet, the Cossacks continued to raid Ottoman territories. In response, the Tatars often raided deep into Russian provinces. Once returning with 3,000 captives, the Tsar replied by sending an army against Azov, but this force was defeated several times, and Musa Pasha sent 400 prisoners, 800 Russian heads, and spoils to Constantinople. Islam Jure, Khan of Crimea, was a bitter enemy of the Russians. He attacked Russian lands and carried off 40,000 of their subjects back to Crimea. Poland and Russia sent their envoys to Sultan Ibrahim's court to protest the Crimean Khan's actions. The Sultan wrote to the Khan of Crimea and asked that the captives be returned. The Tsar, for his part, excused himself by saying the Cossacks were beyond his control, that they had gone so far into remote regions that the Russian government could not reach them. He complained that the Ottomans supported the Tatars against Russia. In the end, the Sultan promised that if the Tsar kept the Cossacks in hand and continued to pay tribute to the Crimean Khan as of old, the Ottoman army would not support the Tatars against Russia. But this agreement had little effect on the peoples. Under Ibrahim, the border fighting between Cossacks and Tatars continued without pause. It is clear how necessary it was to maintain Ottoman naval power in the northern Black Sea. In 1641, Ibrahim sent two officers with letters to the Crimean Khan, asking that the envoys proceed to Constantinople so that they could be introduced to the ambassadors. The Khan read the Sultan's letter and replied with sorrow, "I and all here are servants of the Sultan, but the Russians outwardly desire peace, only because they are cowed by our victories. If we give them respite, they will ravage even the Anatolian coasts. I have repeatedly told my Sultan that there are two strong nearby points which were neglected. It would have been wise to seize them, but now the Russians have occupied them and built more than 20 outposts there. If we sit idle again this year, they will soon advance to conquer all Moldavia." With this answer, the consent, the Sultan's envoys back to Istanbul. Viewers, the second great campaign and victory of Ibrahim's reign was the conquest of Crete. In 1645, Ibrahim dispatched an army to conquer this island, which belonged to the Republic of Venice. Although there was nominal peace between Venice and the Ottoman Empire, the immediate cause for attacking Crete arose when a group of Maltese corsairs seized a convoy of Ottoman merchant ships, sailing from Constantinople to Egypt, and brought them to anchor on Crete's northern coast. When Ibrahim heard of this, he became furious and first wished to attack Malta, but his officers explained that Malta would not be easy to take the very campaign that even the mighty the Magnificent had been unable to complete, since the Venetians often harbored Maltese corsairs and allowed them to anchor at Cretan ports. Conquering Crete was deemed more necessary. Crete, lying near the entrance to the Aegean and on the routes of Chios and the islands of the sea, was strategically more suitable to the Ottomans than Malta. Moreover, Maltese pirates captured Ottoman ships and, after arresting them, anchored at Cretan harbors. Therefore, it was agreed that conquering this Venetian island was more essential. Thus, on April 30th, 1645, a war fleet sailed from the The Sultan publicly proclaimed an attack on Malta, but the admiral received secret orders to strike Crete instead. On June 24th, the fleet reached the western port of Candia. The Venetians had learned of the Sultan's true intent in advance, so all Cretan forts were prepared for defense. The island's local forces were concentrated and reinforcements arrived from Venice as well. Even so, the Ottomans landed with ease and captured the coastal defenses. After taking Chania, they seized Retimo. Rethymno. With these two cities in hand, the Ottoman army advanced into the island, and in 1648 they began the Siege of Candia. The Venetians did everything possible to relieve Candia, but despite repeated episraids on Lemnos and Tenedos, and captures along the Constantinople coast, they could not lift the Siege of Candia. Only in the reign of Sultan Mehmed IV was the city finally taken, and the island of Crete annexed to the Ottoman Empire. After this, the narrative returns to Istanbul. The mother Sultana tried everything to save Ibrahim, but at last she too had to accept the rebels' demand. On 18 Rajab 1058, August 8, 1648, the military commanders and all the high dignitaries of the capital enthroned. Prince Mehmed, then only 7 years old, and swore allegiance to him. Ibrahim had been arrested and imprisoned, but only 10 days into his confinement. Signs of support for him began to appear within the Sipahi cavalry, and those who had deposed him feared he might be restored to the throne. To end this danger forever, they sought a fatwa from the Sheikh al-Islam, asking whether it was lawful to depose and kill a ruler who appoints to the great offices people who bribe for them, and who does not appoint to high offices those worthy of them. The Sheikh al-Islam answered with a single word, yes. Thereupon, Ibrahim was immediately killed. To recap, after the death of Sultan Murad IV, his brother, Ibrahim then, the sole surviving heir, took the throne. In only a short time, he undid what Murad had accomplished. Having endured 8 years of confinement in the palace, Ibrahim at first tried to set finances in order, but he soon abandoned himself to pleasure. Where Murad had put the interests of state at the forefront, even when Sultan Ibrahim, the vices that ruined the empire revived and grew rapidly, the harem again interfered in state affairs. Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa tried to steady Ibrahim, and wrote from the treasury that the coffers cannot meet your expenses. The people are ruined. The infidel armies are besieging border towns. The enemy fleets block the Dardanelles. In short, the decision was made collectively to dethrone Ibrahim. The Sultana mother strove to save him, to no avail. After Prince Mehmed was enthroned, Kara Mustafa was unjustly executed, and the capital's great offices were sold. Ibrahim's obsession with perfumes and sables led to absurd taxes. Ancestral estates were confiscated. The people and the army were enraged. And finally, with the fatwa permitting it, Ibrahim was executed. Thus ended the reign of the mad Sultan Ibrahim. Even as his mind wandered and his worries were buried in the intrigues of the harem and the cunning of Azov, nevertheless lit a fire on Russia's borders and, together with the Crimean Tatars, trampled Russia. And after a 21-year siege finally brought Crete into the Ottoman realm. In the 17th century, Ottoman Empire, where on one side Sultan Murad IV's sword fell as wrath upon the necks of rebels, on the other side, after him, a sultan ascended whom the world came to know as Ibrahim the Mad after him. He was swiftly put to death.